Hello and welcome to the Esty Show. Today we'll be diving into how to use artificial intelligence to solve personalization and pricing problems with Rachel Windzberg. Who is Rachel, you may ask? Rachel is a product manager who has worked on fascinating projects at really cool companies such as Instagram, Fiverr, and even Facebook dating. Yes, it does exist. With an educational background in electrical engineering and an MBA, Rachel brings a unique perspective to her work. Alongside her corporate roles, Rachel runs a coaching business where she helps product managers prepare for interviews and land their dream jobs. Kunal, if you're listening to this, thank you for introducing us. Rachel has a remarkable ability to break down complex concepts into simple, understandable terms. We aim to keep this episode practical, ensuring that listeners walk away with actionable insights you can apply in your day-to-day lives. Before we begin, let's define a few key terms that would be helpful to understand, or at least to have heard of before hearing them in the episode. The first one is hallucinations. In the context of AI, hallucinations are when an AI system generates information that's wrong. It could be incorrect, misleading, or biased. These errors can stem from insufficient training data, incorrect assumptions, biased data, or faulty recall. Next is a paper called Attention is All You Need. This is one of the main research papers behind modern artificial intelligence. It was written in 2017 by 8 scientists at Google, leading to the development of the transformer architecture, which is a foundational model for modern artificial intelligence. A fun fact is that they named the paper as a reference to the song All You Need Is Love by the Beatles. Attention is all you need, get it? And as of 24, the paper has been cited more than 100,000 times. So next time you go to a party and there are a bunch of AI people there, just throw out attention is all you need and everyone will think you're really cool. Active learning and reinforcement learning. We covered those terms in a previous episode with Arvin. Both are subsets of machine learning that use different approaches. Active learning is a semi-supervised method that uses both labeled and unlabeled data to improve accuracy, while reinforcement learning is a goal-oriented approach inspired by behavioral psychology, where models learn through trial and error, rewards, and feedback. And the last term we'll do is retrieval augmented generation, RAG. A RAG optimizes the output of a large language model, LLM, by referencing an authoritative knowledge base outside of its training data sources before generating a response. So why is this important? Because this is cost effective and it's an approach that improves the relevance, accuracy, and usefulness of LLM, of large language model outputs in various contexts. Who is this episode for? This episode is for someone who's interested in understanding how artificial intelligence works, exploring its best use cases for boosting personal productivity, and learning how to incorporate artificial intelligence in improving profitability and user experiences. Rachel's brilliance and engaging personality made this conversation truly enjoyable for me, and I hope you'll walk away feeling enriched, just like I did. We recorded it on June 10th, 2024. Please share this episode with friends who might find it interesting. Follow, rate it on your preferred podcast platform. It means so much to me. Shoot me a note. Let's get started. Rachel, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Esty. How are you doing today?
I am good. You have been an AI product manager way before anyone knew about it or thought it was cool or was appending it to their LinkedIn profiles. Tell us a little bit from your background educationally in electrical engineering to how you ended up at companies like Fiverr, DataDog, Instagram, and Facebook.
Yeah, I'll start by saying I started my career, as you said, as an electrical engineer. That helped me build my technological background, but I really didn't like it, and I don't think I was necessarily the best at it. I am very much a human person, and I was working on semiconductors, actually on technology that's being used today to build the GPUs that NVIDIA uses to power AI. But it was a bit of too lonely for me. I wanted to understand how startups grow. I wanted to understand more of the consumer side. So I joined then a tiny startup called Fiverr. I think I was number 15 there, and I was actually doing digital marketing and user research there before moving to New York, doing my MBA at Columbia, and then going into product management for companies, as you said, like Meta. I worked for both Facebook and Instagram. I worked at DataDog. And really, Meta is where I got to dip my water in machine learning and AI, and the applications I used them for was personalization and recommendations.
I don't know how you have time for all of this, but a fun side business that you have is also coaching product experts. And I am going to personally give you a recommendation and vouch for you because I am a mentee of yours, a client of yours, and we only had a few sessions. But even in those sessions, you've had so much impact. I interview completely differently and was able to, it's crazy, but pretty much get to 2 job offers within 2 sessions of speaking with you.
Thank you, Esty. Congrats.
There's the artificial intelligence that everyone talks about, which is the LLMs, the Chat GPT. But what I'd like to do with you is go a bit deeper in this conversation and talk about artificial intelligence beyond LLMs, and then how product managers who aren't necessarily working on a quote unquote AI product or aren't working for a company that has enough data to do true machine learning, how they can either upskill or utilize artificial intelligence where it can benefit them and their companies versus where it's a complete waste of time.
So I'll start by saying, when you're thinking about LLMs and the changes in LLMs, there were 2 big jump steps in LLMs, and a lot of them around the infrastructure that models run on. But essentially, what you were able to do with a new architecture and a new approach, which is detailed in a paper written by Google called Attention is All You Need. And I highly recommend people read it. It's actually pretty understandable. Essentially, that is the foundations of what we see now for ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, and all of that, which is essentially the ability to increase the model size, the features of the model size, and understanding based on specific contextual elements. So this is the Attention All You Need paper, which is essentially the foundation for all the changes that we have. And the second thing that happened is when OpenAI decided to build a chat interface that's very accessible to users, and suddenly people can actually interact with these models that are much better, but you also have that interactivity. And once you have that, then you have steps like all of these updates and improvements in the applications. You also had DALL-E and the other models that are using more image process, vision processes. So this is really what's going on in LLM, is that you're able to capture many, many more features with the new architectures. You're able to pay attention better to specific things that then allow you to respond more intelligently to things and course correct based on feedback that you receive from the user. So human in the loop feedback is something very popular, and artificial is a very popular term. Now, where this becomes really interesting in applications is these foundation models that you have now, you can now use RAGs, retrieval augmented generation, on top of these models to make them more specific to data sets that you want to work on for LLMs. And there are other different types of models that are very good at taking many factors into consideration or adapting to real-time information. I'll mention 2 of them, which I really love, which is active learning, also known as bandits, or reinforcement learning, which is really how do you set a reward function and a cost function to optimize for different outcomes that you want to see in your product. And we can give examples for this, but I'm just saying these are the key things that I want people to think about. I want them to think about Attention is All You Need paper. I want them to think about RAGs, retrieval augmented generation, and then reinforcement learning and active learning. And all of this, you can also ask Claude, ChatGPT, Gemini. You can also ask them to tell you about these things more as well.
On one foot, attention is all you need. What's the core message of that paper?
The core message of the paper is essentially, instead of trying to go through things word by word, identify what's important and then pay attention to that. That allows you, through neural networks or things like that, that allows you to consider many, many more factors and adapt better in a nutshell.
RAGs?
RAGs is a retrieval augmented generation. Essentially, if you have a foundation model like GPT-4 or like Llama or any other model that you want to think about, that model is general and it's trained on a ton of data, but that might not be specific enough for your use cases. So you can add your data and you can add specific steps that you want the model to think about in the beginning. And using that attention, it will become more personalized to that data set. So essentially, what you're going to see now is companies, they don't have to develop all of these models from scratch. All they need to think about is what makes their data unique. What is the unique piece that they want to focus on? What is their data? And adapt these models for their use cases.
For that, do the models need to be open source?
The fact that they're open, the models to an extent, they don't necessarily need to be open source, but you do need to have an interface that your RAG can connect with. So open source means that essentially anybody can contribute to the code, adapt the code, and change the code. You don't necessarily need to have the models be open source to accomplish personalization of the models. All you need to have is an interface that you can adapt your inputs to the models with.
Okay, we'll get into examples on reinforcement learning shortly. Let's talk about the categories by which product managers can utilize AI to benefit both personally and professionally.
Yeah, if you're thinking about it, you can think about AI for boosting productivity, and you can think about AI as a way to improve your product or decision making, and a lot of it is personalization and things like that, right? So for boosting productivity, I think you can use any of these chat interfaces as your inner voice. You can use it to help you write documents. You can use it to help you summarize concepts, learn new things in a really cool way, because you can ask follow-up questions. And in Google, or when you were searching for something historically, you can't really ask follow-up questions, or you can't really get a distilled summary of just what you need. The challenge is the models will give you answers only as good as what has been inputted. So we've seen all the memes about how does cheese stick to pizza, and then the LLM says through glue, because it's also trained on forums like Reddit and all of the data. So you need to take the data with a grain of salt and cross-reference it to other things, ask for sources, and then do your own research while you're doing it. But to get an initial understanding of the landscape, the principles by something applies, it's really good on productivity. That's on the productivity bit.
So can we do some specific examples on productivity? Just if you have an idea, you say, here's what I'm thinking, give me additional ideas, or what am I missing?
Yes.
How, literally the way you would talk to someone in the office about a project.
Yeah, I would even say, hey, I'm building app X for Y. Who do you think are my key audiences are? What do you think are their key problems? What are questions that I should ask in my interview guide if I care about these things? I think this helps you boost your productivity. And I would use it also as an inner voice. Now, this is where it becomes tricky. You don't want to give it intellectual property that you have. So you don't want to necessarily give these interfaces, if they're external to your company, information about your company. So you want to be careful about how you use it, so you don't, accidentally disclose secrets, right? But you can say, hey, I'm thinking about building S for Y, or I'm in this space. What are the differences between the competitors? And then what references are you using to find this? I think this is very helpful to use.
Question for you. There are a few companies that are specific to legal cases, and it's like a chat GPT, but for lawyers. I saw a similar one for investment bankers, where it basically catalogs all the information that these banks pay hundreds of thousands a year for to know every deal and all the details about the deal, but it's connected to an LLM, so it can extract the information without you having to manually search through it the way you would in the library in the old days. So do you know what the deal is there? Like, do they get over the proprietary hurdle? Is that part of the reason it exists? And for someone who, let's say, they don't want to give away proprietary information, but maybe the company sees value in, hey, if we could somehow isolate or protect our company, we could actually get the quality of our ideas or the scalability of our ideas to be so much bigger. Is there a way to allow for that with GPT-like tools?
Yeah, I don't know the specific of how you would do this specifically, but what you essentially do is you probably buy some sort of a license or an API access to the software. You use RAGs. So the way they're doing it is in the context of what I explained beforehand in RAGs. For investment deals, what you would have is all the investment deals, and then you can extract the information quite well. By the way, if you're thinking about a new investment coming up and you're trying to capture return on investment, LLMs aren't very good with mathematical data necessarily. That's where you would probably want to do a bit of active learning, reinforcement learning, and think about how you would use those kinds of models in addition to the data that you're reading. And that layer of data that you have above will help you find, oh, these are the most relevant precedents for me. This is the average deal close. This is the average, I don't know, EBITDA multiplier, things like that. For law firms, I think it's really interesting. And here, what's really helpful is using precedents and creating legal documents that would take hours and hours to come up with, without having to go through hours and hours to collect that data. There's a really cool startup called Even Up Law that you can look up. They create for injury law. They essentially use AI models to help create and automate and reduce a lot of the steps and data that's needed in order to use claim letters in a fraction of the time that it would need otherwise, because you don't need necessarily people to look for precedents if you're able to have all of the context, all of the information, and then you have, medical data, billing data, all of that. You can use that to create the precedents, understand, and then what's going on, what are the different precedents, as I said a few times, per state. And then what you can do is you can identify, okay, this is probably the claim I want to create for a lawsuit or for an insurance claim. These are the precedents. These are the key factors of what's in the insurance information or in the injury or the accident report, medical bills that is relevant here. And it cuts a lot of time. So for lawyers, I think the key use case is going to be in summarizing and extracting precedents and identifying the important precedents. Now, on both of these cases, what you want to be careful of is hallucination.
Can you explain what that is?
Yeah. So AI can sometimes, it's only as good as the information you feed into it.
Garbage in, garbage out.
Exactly. And if it hits a wall where it doesn't have the relevant information, it might make information up. And so that's where you want to be very careful and see, okay, what are precedents? Ask for links, ask for specific data that it used to come up with what it's coming up with, because otherwise you might find yourself saying that pizza, the cheese sticks to the base with glue. Yeah, go for it.
No, when I was preparing for the Boeing episode, so I asked Perplexity for a timeline of the key events from the McDonnell Douglas acquisition, and it gave me a list of dates. And obviously, I don't know the dates from like 1993, but the dates from 2023 and 2024, I knew they were wrong because I knew that this did not happen in April. So once I saw two dates that I knew were wrong, I was like, oh gosh, like this might all be wrong. And then I had to go and literally check every date myself.
Yeah. So I think a way for you to overcome it is you could ask I don't know if you used Claude or ChatGPT, whatever it was, you could ask, hey, add references to each date. It's almost like you're almost like creating an additional condition for it, and you're forcing it to tell you this is where it got it from. So what that might help is it will increase the accuracy of the response. The cost of it is it won't give you the full information, right? We're getting into like precision versus recall. And maybe even if it gives you the link has a date that has nothing to do with it, but at least you know where it's getting its reference from.
Fascinating. Okay. And then there's one more piece that you bring up for personal use of AI, which I think is extremely important.
You mean personalization?
We'll get there in a second, but like for personal use, communication.
Oh, yeah. I think all of these models are really good at distilling information. Distill. And I think if you're a job applicant that is going to tailor their resume for a specific job opening, you can take the job description and you can take your resume and you can ask these interfaces, hey, how does my resume ladder up to this job posting? Or can you help me highlight the most relevant skills? Like what are the key skills that this job posting asks for that my resume lacks? So you can personalize your resume very well. If you have stories, for example, for your fit interview preparation, you can put in your stories into any of these interfaces and ask, hey, write this story in a STAR method, or cut down the technical details of the story, or even ask it, how does this story match up to these evaluation principles? For example, when I work with clients, I work with them on complexity, connection, like ability to work well with other people, ownership, self-awareness. So you could ask, hey, how does this story match up against these core principles? It might not be 100% there, but it might help you understand, okay, how do you stand? How do you come off based on all the information? So I think it could be a very good inner voice to prepare for interviews. You can also, I don't know, when I was taking my citizenship test to become a US citizen, I used ChatGPT to generate questions for me.
Did you pass?
I did. I am a citizen now. Almost 6 months.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Just in time for the 2024 elections.
Every vote counts.
depending on which state you're in. But
that is so true.
For personal use communications, definitely that. I think also in the workspace itself, a conversation I had over the weekend was how email forces you to be more thoughtful than Slack, because you're sending it once. You're not going to have 45 questions back and forth. And if you do, it's a really bad sign. In Slack, you just throw in a comment, and then these conversations can roll into these enormous, useless, really frustrating threads. So someone at the table was like, I actually treat Slack posts that I put up the way I would treat an email. I put it through ChatGPT before I post, and I'm much more thoughtful to make sure that I can understand which questions people might ask and address them in the initial post.
Yeah. By the way, I try to treat Slack communications as if they're email communications, meaning, and we're going a bit off topic here outside of AI, but I hate Slackuments, which are like arguments over Slack.
Slackuments? I like it.
That's how I call it. But, when you're communicating in chat or in written format, you want to be short. You don't want it to be overbearing for the person. And you also want to think about what questions might come up. And this is another use case, by the way. You're going for a presentation. This is where you want to be careful about the proprietary information. But you could probably tell the chat AI assistant, whatever you're using, these are the key points I'm going to hit in my presentation without putting in data. What might have follow-up questions might I get? And that might help you identify different curveballs that you didn't expect, not just for chat or for email, but also for presentations and executive presence.
Yes. We've touched on how AI can help in personal performance. So one is a brainstorming buddy. Two is summarizing information. People after this conversation are going to Google the attention is all you need article by Google. They can then put it into the LLM and say, hey, summarize it for me.
It probably won't do that anymore. If they recognize it's an academic paper,
oh man,
it no longer does that. But you could, like, a way to overcome that is you just copy and paste pieces of it and say, hey, what does this mean? And I would also encourage people, don't get too much hung up of the math behind it. Just try and understand the ideas that are coming out of it. Like, don't get hooked up on like these big equations that you see there, because I think that's where many people get scared. Try and say, okay, this is the equation that describes that. I don't need to fully understand it. Let's understand what the paper means. It's not very long, and half of it is references, and it is generally accessible.
You're saying just read the freaking paper.
Yeah, just read it. And then if you get stuck on things, then copy and paste pieces of it, put it into whatever AI assistant of your choice, and ask them, explain to me in human words what this means, and it will respond.
And the last piece you mentioned was communication, how you communicate with others, what you write in the post, anticipating questions, how you put presentations together. And a huge caveat for all of this is make sure that proprietary data stays proprietary and you're not divulging data that you're not allowed to divulge.
Yes.
Let's talk about professionally, how you can use AI to boost productivity for your company. It could be customer facing. It could be using something you mentioned ultra personalization. We discussed pricing. Let's take one example and draw it out.
Yeah. So I think that LLMs use cases, automating AI assistants or chatbots to reduce the amount of back and forth you need a human to put in. That's definitely one. The risk there is, and I think we've seen that about a year ago, one of the airlines made up, the AI made up
a refund policy
that didn't exist, and the airline needed to pay, right? So this is an example.
Yeah, I look it up. Yeah,
it's LLMs. That's an LLM use case. I actually really love thinking about AI and the different models I mentioned beforehand, and thinking about how you can adapt something in real time based on new information. Let's imagine that I am Spotify and I want to create a playlist for you, right? I have all of this information about this person. Let's talk about hyper-personalization, a playlist that adapts in real time. So right now, Spotify creates playlists for you. They have Discover Weekly. They have their daily picks. They have like artist focused. But imagine that Spotify can create a playlist that adapts in real time based on how you're interacting with it. So it sees that you're skipping a song. It sees, I don't know, it's morning. It sees based on your historical information that usually in the morning you like chill songs. Playing you the chill playlist, then you're asking to skip a song. It recognizes, oh, the second that you skip the song, it's going to try maybe another song from the same genre. You skip it again. It's like, okay, Rachel doesn't want to listen to this genre anymore. I'm going to try something a bit different, and kind of like use that feedback loop to build your playlist for you as you go based on real-time signals. And it can collect a lot of the data that it sees about you. What are your past listening patterns? What do you like listening to? What do you usually stay listening to after you've skipped? And kind of like use that in real time. And maybe it can recommend a podcast to you. I don't know if it's identifying that you're about to go into your commute, and it can do hyper personalization, optimizing for an objective that Spotify would want to optimize for. Let's say Spotify wants to optimize for you staying on the platform as long as possible, or maybe Spotify wants to optimize for you listening to artists that aren't very frequently used. So it can use reinforcement learning there. And active learning would be essentially adapting to what you're doing in real time and the signals that it collects, while taking into consideration the cost and reward functions of Spotify's business objectives.
Question for you there. And by the way, that airline was Air Canada. It looks like there was a lawsuit about it, and they decided to honor that policy that never really existed, was invented by the chatbot. This example that you give with Spotify, it's a really good one, where once you know who the customer is based on their actions on your website, then you can personalize their experience to one that's going to just be better and they're going to be more excited to listen to. David Lifson, just in his newsletter, criticized the New York Times onboarding experience. He was like, I've been logged in for the past 18 years reading all these articles, and then they're giving him this 2001 onboarding experience where he has to select the bubbles of what kind of news types he likes. And he's like, you don't need this. You know what I like.
Exactly. And this is actually, if you take the New York Times example, then this can change completely the onboarding experience of new users. Why? Because based on what the new user, you can just show an article or maybe show a few of them or even images and have the user click on something. Based on what they click, you know what to show them more. And you can do that, and you can compare them to cohorts of other new users and how they're responding in real time. And you can use multi-arm bandits for it. Multi-arm bandit, I'll explain very briefly what it means. Active learning, essentially. What you do is imagine that you have a field of gold. And with traditional ML models that are very exploitative, what you end up doing is you search the field of gold, you find gold, you just continue hitting it. And with active learning, what you do is you're constantly balancing between your explore and exploit. So you divide the field, you look at a certain place, you hit gold, you continue looking, you hit gold, you continue looking, and then you decide how you balance between your explore and exploit. So that's something really powerful.
Looking for a similar type of environment, assuming that because there was gold in the previous one, we're likely to find gold again.
Yes, but you also want,
that's explore.
If you end up doing that, that's explore, looking for different things, and then exploit is when you get the signal you want, you continue digging deeper. The challenge of continuing exploit is that you might start giving repetitive content, and you haven't covered all of the interest graph that your user might have. So that's why you want to continue exploring and exploiting, and that balances between looking at everything possible and showing you what you care about and identifying other things you might care about so that you don't get bored.
That's something, let's say Spotify, Amazon, those are apps that I use when I'm always in a logged in state. And I imagine most users are. That being said, something like a news article or e-commerce sites, those we're usually accessing in non-logged in states. How can companies that don't have years and years of our history still personalize an experience in a way that is relevant for the person visiting the site?
That's a great question. And it also goes into like a lot of the key hurdles that you have with like GDPR. You can't really collect signals about people and use other sites that they're using to personalize the experience. Exactly like I said right now. You can start by showing the most popular items. For example, that's kind of like exploitative exploration, but you want to keep them diverse enough. So let's say you're a clothing site, you will show them your most popular shirt, your most popular trousers, your most popular shoes. I'm just making this up. What are they looking for? Okay, they're clicking on that shirt. They either clicked on that shirt because they like the shirt, or because they're looking for a shirt, or because they're looking for a color. So then you start exploring and exploiting on that aspect. Okay, they're starting to add shirts to their cart. You can then understand, okay, how does this cart compare to the average size of a shopping cart? Is this user going to get overwhelmed by the price they're seeing? Or has this user added enough shirts and now it's time to show them some other pieces of clothing that they might buy with that shirt? So that's kind of like exploring. So you keep on exploring and exploiting, and then your reward function will be on the size of the shopping cart, and your cost function would be on the likelihood of the user dropping off before completing the transaction. And you just continue adapting, and you can find ways to nudge the user towards a checkout when you identify that they might not be buying, like that they might get overwhelmed and not buy. Sorry.
Shein has been in the news recently with the huge IPO, and for the London Stock Exchange, that's huge. And what I'm seeing is that their e-commerce is very heavily based on AI, to the point where they're giving you images of clothing that doesn't necessarily exist, but that they think you'll like based on AI. And then if you order it, they'll create it for you.
That's pretty cool. Yeah.
Is that
That's
accurate
another
or no?
way. I'm not very familiar with Shein. I haven't used it myself in a few years, but what you're saying makes a lot of sense. Like, companies could use this, and especially if the labor force is cheap enough for you to create custom. Or on the other side, you could even think about it as like somebody designing a wedding dress. They're looking at different wedding desks, and it's very expensive to manufacture a wedding dress, right? So based on what they're doing, you can identify, and then you can decide, okay, this is what people want. Then I'm going to create it either for people or for the person itself. And you can do all sorts of cool things. Like, imagine that you get a body scan of somebody for that wedding dress example. You know their exact fittings, their exact measurements, you know their proportions, and you know what tends to look good on those people or not. So you could almost create an AI model to recommend the wedding dress based on your proportions, and kind of like show you the images and then decide to make it. So I think it's a really cool application. I wasn't aware that Shein does that, and I'm going to read more about it. It's really cool.
I'll research, because I might be making this up.
Well, if not, it's maybe they should start. Maybe you gave them a good, maybe they should start, or maybe they should consider hiring you because you have great ideas for them.
I feel like the wedding dress example is one business leaders aren't excited about, because the rate of repeat purchase is very low.
Yes. So yeah, but you can take that into like many different
Anything.
directions. And if you're making wedding dresses, you know, the whole process of making them, it's such an expensive purchase. And like, people, they come in, they want to try things in the salon and all of that. So it might not be the best example, but it's hyper personalization.
Right.
Know.
And in hyper personalization, one thing that's super relevant for businesses, and a problem that's great to have a more scientific approach to, which is pricing.
Yes.
There are obviously the legal ramifications, which I think depends where you are, but charging two people for the same exact product but a different price, I think, could be problematic in certain areas.
Yeah. And I believe that in the US, price discrimination is illegal. I think in other countries it is legal, but a way to overcome that could be with generating personalized promotion coupons, right? And so the way you could theoretically identify somebody's price sensitivity and recommend personalized discounts for them is, for example, in the shopping cart abandonment example I gave you now, you can identify the right time to give a discount, even if it's the same discount for everyone. But there are legal ramifications, because I don't think you can flat out sell a can of Coke to Lisa for $2 and for Daniel for $1 if you're the same shop. But I think you can find a way to give Lisa a coupon code and not give it to the other person, right? Which isn't necessarily fair, but you could theoretically do that. I've done a lot of work on pricing as well, but not in the US.
It's interesting. Everlane and Noom had completely different companies. Everlane is a fashion company and Noom is a weight loss app, but they both had a pay what you want feature. Where it's like, for the first month, give a number. And if you put in, you don't want to pay anything, they'll give you the first month for free. Or Everlane, they'll tell you it costs us $29 to manufacture this, but you pay what you want. Do you think that strategy is a strategy of getting information so that they could recommend better? Or is it really just a more advanced coupon discount for the first purchase type of thing?
I think it's more of the latter. It's interesting because you can't really, it's a sophisticated way to go around price discrimination. And then you can present different numbers, like it costs us to produce X versus Y. But it is interesting for optimizing pricing using AI models. What you need is statistical variation. So you need a variety of prices that the consumers see, and then you identify, like, you kind of like run a bandit on it. Like I said beforehand, you explore, you exploit until you find the right price point. That's the theoretical way to do it. And you think about your reward function is maximizing your profit rather than revenue, actually, because you don't want to be selling at a loss. But sometimes if you know you have fixed costs or whatever, it's actually, you will be willing to sell at a thing. But essentially what you would need there is price variation. It's actually people seeing different prices. So then the model knows how to factor in elasticity based on different features that you have about the consumer. And then you can offer the optimal price point.
That's very interesting. So as an e-commerce site, you can actually offer 3 very similar looking items at different price points and see which price point the customer gravitates towards.
Yes.
As a gauge of what their willingness to pay is. Yeah.
Yeah. And imagine that you're an e-commerce aggregator. You could show the same 3, you can show 3 red tops. One will come from a fast fashion retailer and will cost $10. Another one will be a mid-market brand that will be $50. And then you will have your elite brand that will be $1,000, and you will see what somebody theoretically you could do that for this type of shirt, how people, but then you're also going into other types of things like, are people brand sensitive? Are people price sensitive? So assuming it's the same brand, the same top that looks very similar, then if you show 3 different items, my gut tells me if you show it at the same place with the same locations, people will go to the either like they might actually go to the in between because they might inadvertently think that there's something wrong with the middle one. But in order to get the true price elasticity, you need to show different people the different products with the different prices with like statistical variation on the prices that you're showing, because then the model will be able to identify what is the actual elasticity towards that shirt. So the example where you're showing them the same 3 shirts, it's just for the same user might not be the best one. But if you can hack this to be a very similar shirt with 3 different price points and then kind of like cancel out all the variables, I don't see why not.
One more thing I want to discuss with you is after this, whatever this financial macroeconomic thing that we're going on in the world blows over and we're in the new world, what does product management and engineering and that relationship look like? A bit of background on why I'm asking this information. So Akash Gupta put out numbers that I'm going to speak with him. We'll see where those numbers came from, but basically that there are the job postings for product management declined by 90% year over year. A lot of startups are cutting that position. And there's a lot of concern in the industry. Hey, is my job going away? So all of the CEOs who are afraid to talk about AI, and Scott Galloway coming out with the article, which AI is the Ozempic of corporate, where officially no one is on it, but everyone's on it. So the question we've heard a million times is AI going to take my job? What's Rachel's take on it?
It is and it isn't. If I'm thinking about why product management jobs have been cut off, I think AI is a part of it, but it's not the only part of it. I think since 2022, we're seeing a bit of industry falling out of love with middle managers, and product managers fall into that as well. So I think in general, and I think also, especially in big tech, I think incentives were around building empires and not building teams. Like if you would read evaluation rubrics for promotions in order, it's the biggest like, oh, I want to get promoted to director. So I need to manage a product manager who's also a manager, or I need to manage a product manager who's this level. So it kind of like creates sometimes the wrong incentives. So I think that might be some of the things we're seeing, not just AI. And, AI really can help improve a lot of the things like product managers. What do we do, right? We help identify what we build and why we build it and how we're going to measure success, right? These are the 3 key things that we think about as product managers. And then we need to do a lot of the stakeholder alignment to get those ready. And the challenge with product managers is everybody thinks they can be a product manager. And between different companies, the role is defined differently. And theoretically, yeah, you could build feature X, like put it in a Chat GPT or a Claude or a Gemini, and it will give you a spec. Is a spec good or not? But the question is about the market research, about how it fits, about the user experience, about the signal. So I think a lot of the work, more of the strategic work, is still going to be there. And I think a lot of the work of like figuring out what to build is important and needs to be done. But development cycles are going to be cut really short. Why? Because these models, these foundation models that you can now plug into and hook into can really expedite development process. And it can even help you write code, right? I had to write SQL queries after not writing them for a few years, and I knew I needed to do them in Jupyter notebooks, right? And I've never used a Jupyter notebook before. I would get all of these errors. Like all you need to do is like copy and paste whatever you put in with the error into a ChatGPT or a Gemini, and it will write you a new query that actually works. Does it work perfectly? No, but with a bit of understanding, you can work on it. So I think for product managers, what's going to be really important is prioritization, focusing on the why and being able to tell a compelling story on why you can build that, because you don't really want a product that's a feature Frankenstein. time, right? And then for engineers, I actually think being able to deal with ambiguity is going to be really important. There's a startup that I consult, and they're telling me, Rachel, the engineers keep on saying that our PRDs aren't clear enough, that we need to think about every single edge case, or we need to be very clear. And I'm saying, if the engineers can't handle ambiguity, if the PRD is so good that you can just put it in a chat GPT and it spits out the code, then those engineers are going to be out of a job very quickly. So I would say for product managers, I would be really focused on stakeholder management and the why behind things. And for engineers, I would think about problem solving, handling ambiguity, being able to iterate quickly, and being able to use these tools to increase your productivity. Are product manager jobs going to continue falling? Maybe, but I think it's also a question. You can do much more with your time. So how can you be more productive? How can you stay on top of the game? How can you help justify the decisions that you're making? And how do you measure success to make sure that customers are actually using and engaging and willing to pay for the products that you put out there? That's going to be the key focus of product managers, rather than, can you write a Jira ticket here or do a feature design there?
If there's one person you could meet, dead or alive, who would it be?
Wow.
This is
wow.
the ground.
You're touching a sensitive point because I'm a music lover. And so my answers might actually be outside of the tech world completely, because there are a few musicians that I would love to meet, but I'm sure your question doesn't relate to that.
No, it's fine.
So I would probably say Daniel Jones in Australia or Matthew Bellamy in England. Daniel Jones was the lead singer of Silverchair, which was my favorite band growing up. And he started a solo career later, and he's a magnificent artist. And then actually AI is quite pertinent to Matt Bellamy, because he actually writes a lot about how robots are taking over, not exactly how they're taking over the world, but like the new society that we live in, and like governments and things like that. He's the lead singer of Muse, which is, I've probably seen them live 14 times. I got to meet them in person, and their music is very much about, in my opinion, it's very political, and it's very much about not letting the algorithms take over as well. And it's actually really funny. They're a really good musician that asked ChatGPT to write a Muse style song. So ChatGPT wrote the lyrics for it. I can try and find it for you. And then he composed it, I think, and he plays it, and he does a very good Matthew Bellamy imitation. And yeah, that song could have been written by Muse and performed by Muse the way he did it. So I think it's actually really interesting. But yeah, those are the two people I would probably like to meet.
Next question. What is your weekend hobby?
I have two weekend hobbies.
Okay.
One is career coaching, which is more of a side hustle, and executive coaching. These are like my passions. And then another hobby is I love playing poker, and I guess another one is I love playing chess. I would probably say, if I rank these activities by how good I am, I'm probably a good coach. I'm an okay poker player, and I'm not a very good chess player, but I'm trying to improve on all of those.
Do you follow Gary Kasparov?
No, but I know of him. I look a lot at Gotham Chess as somebody who creates a lot of content about chess, and I'm trying to learn from them. I also have a friend from my poker group who has been teaching me chess, and I've improved. It's funny to see how my graph kind of like spikes once I started taking chess lessons, which I do. And I watch a lot of poker content, and I take a lot of poker lessons. It's actually, by the way, in AI, it's really interesting, when Gary Kasparov went to gate the machine, this is even long ago because there's like perfect information. So chess can be solved through machine learning even before AI. Poker is actually a really interesting development. I think it was a few years ago, a group of researchers actually coming from Facebook, they built an AI model that was able to beat professional poker players heads up in a tournament format. So I do think that there's a lot of interesting applications for AI into poker, and obviously into chess, AlphaGo, all of those games. Game theory is something I'm very interested in. And yeah, so these are my hobbies.
Outside of technology, artificial intelligence, what's your one message for anyone listening to this podcast?
Industry is changing quickly, and we need to adapt. We need to adapt with kindness. We're seeing changes in terms of jobs being taken away, jobs being created, new technology. We're seeing a world that is very chaotic and is probably only going to get more chaotic. So I think working on our resilience is really important, and being kind to ourselves is probably my main takeaway to people and to each other.
And to each other.
Yes.
Rachel, thank you so much.
No, thank you. This was super fun. Thanks, Esty.
If you've gotten this far, thank you for listening to another one of my episodes. Remember to follow The Esty Show on whichever platform you use to listen to podcasts. If you have any feedback, questions, or just want to share your own experiences, don't be shy. Hit me up on LinkedIn or email. That's esty.podcast@gmail.com. I'm all ears. Until next time, stay curious, stay bold, and never stop learning.